Please welcome back Becky Anderson and the panel on perspectives from around the world.
Welcome back. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to have my next panel here. We are very specifically taking a stab at a global overview at the beginning of what is going to be a really rich couple of days here in Abu Dhabi. And the perspectives from those I have here on the stage are absolutely invaluable, and I know that you will agree. These are perspectives very specifically from around the world, the divergence in geo-economic and political trends across the regions of the world presents significant challenges in the year ahead, and we know that there are significant tailwinds, and some of which we just discussed on the last panel, but we also know that there are very specifically some fantastic opportunities out there. And where do those opportunities lie? I think the perspective from those who I have with me today will be absolutely invaluable. His Excellency, Iván Duque Márquez, is the 33rd President of the Republic of Colombia. Thank you for joining us. Michael Milken needs no introduction, Chairman of Milken Institutes. Mohandas Pai is the Chairman of Aarin Capital Partners, and Patrice Motsepe is the founder and Chairman of the African Rainbow Minerals, co-founder of the Motsepe Foundation. It's always good to have you all. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Some of you I have already seen up in Dubai this week, particularly Patrice. I know that you've been very much involved in the business and philanthropy discussions that have been going on at COP, and those have been terrific to see. So thank you for that. Michael, why don't we start with you? I'm really eager to get the perspective of everyone on this stage about what you believe your sort of three key drivers are now and going forward into 2024. Michael, let's start with you.
Well, one, I think our goal at these events, whether they're on every continent in the world of the Milken Institute besides Antarctica, we're going to try to work on that. It's really to get you to see the world with new eyes. And so underpinning all of this is technology. So I'm sure our panelists are going to talk about how technology is changing. But I'd really like to address maybe, if I could, Becky, 5 areas that maybe the other panelists could drill down on. First, education. You want to build something, you want to build a company, you want to deal with crisis in an area of the world, you're so dependent on the education of those individuals, both those that are nationals and expats. And one example I would give, maybe if we pull up slide 11, is there was a situation in a city called Seattle on the northwest part of the United States. And that situation was that the leading technology company and the company born in that area and the largest company in its field, Boeing, made the decision to leave Seattle. And there was this actual sign in Seattle that, will the last person left in Seattle please turn off the lights? And so it actually existed. But Seattle has been an enormous growth driver, really because of just a handful of individuals. And the importance of that, and I'm sure our panelists will talk, whether it's the leadership, the government, the president, the prime minister. And Seattle had, a slide 12, 4 people that lived there. One was Bill Gates, who was born there and built Microsoft there. One was a man named Jeff Bezos, who decided to move there, and Amazon employs more than 1.5 million employees today. One was Craig McCall, who really led the mobile revolution, and one was Howard Schultz, who built Starbucks. So just a handful of people And when you look at the next slide, the growth of income in Seattle, it exceeded those other areas of the United States. Second, I would say, is demographics. It's becoming more prevalent, Becky, but I think people dramatically underestimate what demographics is going to do to the world. The Northern Hemisphere dominated much of the last couple thousand years, but a substantial reduction in birth rates. And if we pulled up, say, slide 6, for example, you will see that if we just picked one country in sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria, that has the 10th highest birth rate in Africa, not the first. More children are born in Nigeria every year than all of South America, all of North America, and all of Europe, from Ireland to Russia. And this is just one country. And so the changing demographics today, and when you look at North Asia, for example, South Korea, half the women in South Korea do not intend to ever have a child. And 60 years ago, the average woman in South Korea had 6 children. Half the women in Japan do not intend to ever have a child. And the birth rate in China has dropped by 60%. Less than 10 million children were born in China in 2022, down from 25 million. So the aging populations primarily in the north, the young populations in the south, and understanding the role of India, that we have a great representative on this panel, and South America and Sub-Saharan Africa is going to be very important to the history of the world. At one time, 80% of the world's economy was just North America, Japan, and Europe. At that time, it was 20% of the population, 80% of the world's economy. Today, it's less than 50. Financial markets, that was touched on in your opening panel, Becky. Today, we have the major change is the role of private equity in the world. More than half the companies in the United States of any size are controlled by private equity. We live with artificially low rates for a long time, and so many companies that are doing well from an operation standpoint are going to be challenged by their capital structure. Next, health. You cannot go to a Milken Institute event without us giving you 2 slides. I call up number 1, in that the major driver of the world's economy, and this is the 3rd century, is public health and medical research. And more than 50% of all economic growth has been this. If we take a look at the last slide, next slide 2, just to look at what has happened with life expectancy. And starting at the beginning of the 20th century, in the world it was 31 years of age. Today it is low to mid-70s. It took 4 million years of evolution to increase life expectancy by 11 years. Today, more than 40 years in front of us. And lastly, sustainability and the environment. Healthy humans, healthy planet. And the UAE has been a center of this conversation in the last week. So I think technology touches all 5, but looking at the world as it's going to be, not as it is important.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Excellent. And that provides us some real sort of grist for this wider conversation. Let's start in Latin America and South America and bounce off what Michael has just given us there. And Michael's comment at the back end of his sort of 5 key drivers are that technology and AI sort of underpins everything that he has just discussed, and we could go backwards from sustainability right through to where he started with education. There are clear opportunities, clear challenges that we face, but clear opportunities out there.
Well, before we talk about the opportunities, Becky, and it's a great honor for me to be in this amazing panel, I have to say that what Mike just mentioned, in my own reflection for the Global South, has some concerns that are really essential. One is that, yes, we do have right now a demographic bonus because we have a young population, but the population is aging at a very fast pace. And that means, just to give you an idea, in a country like Colombia, we have today around 5 million people that are above 65. But in less than 3 decades, we're going to have 15 million people. And that is a major change. But what makes things more difficult is the level of the informal economy. Because most of the people that are now working don't have a social security protection once they become elders. And that is happening in the rest of Latin America. So having a non-protected elder population in less than 2 decades, it's a recipe for conflict. And then you have another issue, which is, yes, people are aging very fast, and as Mike well said, the health challenges are not minor, because the amount of cardiovascular disease and also the exposition that the population has to other non-transmittable diseases is quite high. So that is going to put a lot of fiscal pressure on the healthcare systems some years from now. So I mentioned those as big challenges out of what Mike has described in his 5 points. Now, opportunities, and this is what I regularly talk about Latin America. This is like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We see a lot of democratic threats because there is some populism and demagoguery governments that are putting a lot of uncertainty to the economy. Then you have other great performers. But in a nutshell, this year, 2023, is going to be the highest foreign direct investment ever reached by Latin America in its history. And that is something to put an eye on. And the second is, this year, for the first time in 20 years, Mexico is going to be the United States' #1 trading partner. So for the first time in 20 years, is going to surpass China. That is also something to put an eye on. And on specific opportunities, the nearshoring will play a great role just because a lot of companies are bringing investments to Latin America, looking to the North market. But second, Latin America has 2 very important solutions for things the world is needing. One, food security. We have 23% of the world forest, but we have more than 15% of the world arable land, which means Latin America will play an immense role in food security. And also when it comes to non-conventional renewable energies, the whole region has almost the possibility of more than 200 gigawatts of solar and wind that can be turned into green ammonia or into green hydrogen, and those are amazing opportunities. And let me finish by technology. Latin America, in my opinion, it's lagging on certain types of technologies like AI or cybersecurity, but there are things that are happening in Latin America that are very interesting. Fintech. We have made the largest inclusion to financial services ever, and on average, we have now 70% of everybody above 18 years old with at least one financial product. Countries like Colombia, Mexico, Chile, Peru, Argentina, and Brazil is more than 85%, if not 90%, which allows this to bring new technologies to include financially the population. And I'll finish by this. EdTech, education, and agri-tech. Those are the drivers. And my last sentence, 2024 is going to be marked by what I called CCT, climate, conflict, technology. Those will be the essential discussions that we will have in the region.
Mohandas, let's thank you. Let's bring you in here. What's your perspective on, firstly, these key drivers that Michael launched this panel with, and pick up, if you will, off the President's CCT, very specifically CCT, sort of vision going forward?
Becky, we are in the midst of the digital revolution today. The industrial revolution changed the world because till then, India, China were 45% of world GDP. Europe became the greatest economic power in history. Now we are seeing the shift to the emerging markets because of the digital revolution. We are seeing the shift from the global supply chain created by the industrial revolution to the internet. Out of 8 billion people on the planet, 5.56 billion people have a mobile connection, 5.25 billion people have access to the internet. India has 850 million people accessing the internet. On the internet, you can do business synchronously, asynchronously, 24/7. That shifts the whole way we do business, because business is about connecting producers to consumers. Now, a small company in a remote part of India, in the Himalayas, can connect to a client in New York instantaneously, and supply chain receipts to the background where DHL can possibly ship goods. Now, look at the shift in business that happens. That is creating new ways of doing business. Of the top 10 most valuable companies in the world, 8 are digital, barring Saudi Aramco and Berkshire Hathaway. The world is sending us a message. We've never seen $3 trillion companies in the world. Now it's $3 trillion. Apple was $3 trillion. And that is changing the way how the world is. And India has pioneered the use of digital technologies to transform the lives of people. Over the last 10 years, 1.3 billion people have a number called Aadhaar. It is a public utility. 650 million people in India did not have an address. Now they have an address. $400 billion of money has gone to their bank accounts. 500 million bank accounts have been opened. 50 million houses have been built using digital technologies because they use satellite images to transfer money. We have free food given to 800 million people because digitally we can manage that. We are using AI to improve tax collection, which are going up in double digits because we have a database where all streams of income are linked together, and the AI makes sure that we prepare a tax return where everything is documented, so you can't fudge your return. Everything is calculated. And this has transformed based on what we call the India Stack. India Stack is a great piece of software led by Nandan Nilekani of Infosys, where over the last 12 years, we have been able to create what is called a digital public good. It is a utility, a platform owned by a public company, and that is used by every individual to interact with each other. 42% of global payments digitally are in India at almost no cost. 20 billion payments happen every year. So digital revolution will transform the world, transform people's lives. The next point I'll make is about demographics. We have 450 million people below the age of 18, and we have 23 million babies. It was 25 million 3 years ago. But we have 130 million people above the age of 60. This 130 million will go to 200 million. So we're going to have an aging crisis. While the number of young people is going to come down, our fertility is now 2.0. In a large part of India in the south is 1.7, 1.6. Is like the developed world, much of the developed world. So we're going to see an aging crisis. Last year, China's population shrank by 0.43%. China's population shrank. They only had 9.6 million babies. Japan had, like Mike keeps telling us, 800,000 babies being born, 1.6 million being born. The Japanese population, 122, will shrink to 97 million by 2050, 67 million. So aging and the shrinking of population is a very big thing. I mean, these are the two things. Of course, climate change will create the reordering of the energy markets. I think Mike can tell us maybe $12, $15 trillion of investment in the ground for oil and everything else. That has to change with new investment. You said we need $1 trillion, couple of trillion for climate change, right? And I think that's going to be very big. So all these things coming together means in the next 7 years, we're going to see change which has never happened before in history. And we have to cope with that. There'll be a shift of economic power because China has come up. Now you have the United States and China. Europe is a declining, aging power. That is a big challenge because we used to Europe dominating, the West dominating. The United States will dominate. Asia will be a big power. Middle East is doing very well. India is doing well. China is a big, big power. $32 trillion of PPP GDP as against $20 trillion nominal.
I'm fascinated by I mean, let's not call them the emerging middle powers at this point, because the emerging middle powers have effectively emerged to to varying degrees, and I think the impact of those powers, as we see this sort of the fight of the superpowers at this point, is I think a really interesting and untold story. Patrice, let's just get your perspective as we've shared insight across this panel on Michael's sort of 5 key drivers and your perspective to the President's point on the sort of CCT idea.
I mean, the world is extremely competitive. I mean, it's exciting to what's happening in India, what's happening in South America. I mean, Mike always brings this exciting information to give a perspective on the world. We invest extensively in Africa. We've got huge investments in India, South America, and North America. Technology is already changing everything. We are part of breakthrough energy ventures. You spoke about philanthropy on the family philanthropy side with Bill Gates. It started many years ago. And the whole global economy is changing enormously, and it's critically important to keep track. We think that technology, particularly from an African perspective, will make Africa a globally competitive destination. There are challenges, and there will be challenges in Africa because it's a very diverse and a very mixed economy.
But where would you identify those investment opportunities? And you're right. I mean, let's not just call them bottlenecks. Let's be quite clear about the kind of tailwinds that, and the headwinds that any sort of different and different investment strategy might face. But how are things changing for you very specifically?
I mean, we've got a partnership with Allianz, which is the largest insurance company in the world. A company called Sanlam, where we are the largest shareholder. Sanlam has got $120 billion on the asset management side. Invest throughout the continent. The perception that there isn't sufficient liquidity in Africa is not totally correct. African investors have to diversify. And we're excited about the continent, and you're asking specifically, where do you see opportunities? I think in almost all industries. Mike and, we've got this Milken Motsepe Prize at the core of which is to identify some of the smartest, brightest opportunities in agriculture. Of course, education is key for the youth. We've just launched the climate change part. But again, Becky, investors know more about what's happening in the world than than the perception that is created. Many of the people here know, it's always difficult. Sometimes you sort of tell them what they already know, because we look for opportunities all the time. And, that places where we've burned our fingers, and on the asset management side, these are other people's money. We are an entrepreneurial family, and on the family office. So I just want to say in conclusion, Mike spoke about the demographic, what we call a demographic dividend, which we have to stay ahead of the demographic dividend, because there are about 400 million young people in Africa right now between the ages of 15 and 25. Exciting, but this demographic dividend can also become a demographic time bomb if you don't educate, if you don't create opportunities. And I think just the last point is, investors know countries where our investments are welcome, where we are embraced. I mean, I saw the ministers talking from UAE. A few weeks ago, we engage with investors all over the time. And if you go to a region, India is amazing. We've invested billions of dollars in India. The problem with India is exactly because there's so much confidence. The assets are highly priced. In some cases, overpriced.
They're not giving you
in
a
which
discount. Patrice, just to have you as a partner, they're not giving you a discount?
When I went to, Mike and I are part of what's called the Giving Pledge. So many years ago, I went to Omaha and had a very interesting discussion with Warren. And I think one of the things that he always emphasizes is you've got to make sure that you pay the appropriate price. So talking about a discount, I love discounts. I actually love cheap investments where I can see a huge opportunity to.
Can you share where you're finding those at the moment for the wider audience here?
I think they know as much as I do, if not better. But I do have a bias for Africa. And just because I know Africa, I'm excited. I mean, we've got shareholders all over the world. I see young Africans in New York, in London, in LA, went to Harvard, went to Stanford, went to Oxford, bright, know the continent, and again, technology, sometimes he was telling me about Bangalore, exciting. I go to Silicon Valley, I listen to what they tell me about technology. Just when I think I know a little bit, I realize I know very little. It changes so quickly, but we've got to keep running. We've got to keep track.
Let's talk about leadership in this in these current times, because I think that's important. Let's start just here and go down. What do you make of what we are seeing as far as leadership is concerned? In the US, we are going into a very, very consequential election in 2024. And whether you buy or not the kind of demise of the US as a superpower, and we are certainly seeing some evidence of that, we know how absolutely influential the States still is, and how important that the leadership is from Washington at present. So let's just talk about, what's your perspective on leadership?
Becky, I think that the challenge that we see today in specific leadership, or the leadership exercise in different places around the world, is the amount of polarization that we're seeing. It's putting a lot of danger to the institutions. In democratic regimes, we're seeing levels of polarizations that we haven't seen in a long, long time. And even in the past, when we saw some moments of polarization, there were people that were able to bridge the divide. So, for example, if you look in the U.S. at the Reagan years, yeah, there was polarization, but you had people like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan who were able to bridge the divide. You even saw the case of President Clinton, or even in the times of Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon. There were times where there were opportunities to bridge the divide. It worries me that those moments to bridge the divide are no longer there, are no longer easy, and is going to affect a lot of decisions, from foreign policy to domestic policy. And we're seeing the same thing in Europe. We're seeing extreme right movements emerge with radicalism against migrants, with radicalism against multilateral policy, or even the European integration. And those things create uncertainty. And even when you see, for example, levels of polarization in democratic countries in the Middle East, it also opens the opportunity for things that aren't expected to occur. So I would say we have to put a lot of attention, and we have to be able to understand that there is a moment of greatness that has to be called. And I'll talk about the CCT specifically, climate. We need to understand that we're not getting to meet the NDCs by 2030, that the world temperature is going to be above 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we need to act now. But those levels of acting or addressing the needs require a lot of political consensus. I saw it in Colombia. We passed by unanimous approval in Congress, both chambers, with levels of polarization, the climate action bill. Why? Because we didn't have deniers of climate change. So that is one thing to put attention. And that also takes me to the question of climate migration. We're not putting too much attention to this. We're going to have more than 5 million climate-driven migrants next year. And this is going to put a lot of pressure on different systems of government. And third, I'm very worried about what's going on in Ukraine and what's also going on in the Middle East. In the case of Ukraine, I am worried Ukraine will have elections next year. They will have maybe to postpone them. But the fact is, if Ukraine doesn't receive the amount of funding they need, what is going to be the answer to define success? Is it going to be Putin keeping more territory? Is it going to be Ukraine giving it up? That is a danger. And last, I would say, in the Middle East, there's no question that one of the most important things that has happened in the last years has been the Abraham Accords, because it was an opportunity to bridge, divide, to create long-term opportunities. But it's also very clear that Hamas, for example, it's a danger for the possibility to build a two-state solution. And that has to be tackled not only by Israel, but it has to be tackled by the whole community of the Middle East. And that's not easy, but that also requires the greatness from places where the polarization is putting a lot of damage to foreign policy, like the United States of America.
You could argue that further normalization would actually help to promote the idea of a two-state solution and provide a political horizon for the Palestinians going forward, and I think that debate continues. Michael?
Becky, when you talk about the United States, the world is going to grow economically, and the U.S. percentage of the world is going to drop. But it's the moral leadership, I think, is the key area. And if we could pull up slide 8, I think it's extremely important that people around the world understand the dramatic change that's occurring in the United States. So in 1960, 85% of everyone not born in the United States was born in Europe or Canada. Today, the majority of people in the United States have born in Latin America, Asia, or Africa, or the Middle East. There are more people in the United States today that were born in sub-Saharan Africa than in Europe. And at the current rate, there'll be more people born in the Middle East living in the United States than from Europe. So when you think of the United States, you need to think about the dramatic change in demographics. California, more than 50% of everyone under 25 is a Latin American ancestry. Number 2, I want to re-stress medical once again. If we pull up slide 7, if you look at what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa, you're going to have countries that their life expectancy is going to double in just 2 generations. In 40 years, you're going to double life expectancy. And so a woman had a 95% chance of passing AIDS on to her children. Now it's less than 2. And the largest number of people with AIDS in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. And if you look at the challenges that medical research has the potential to achieve here, slide 10, you could see that in China, no one had diabetes 40 years ago. And on slide 10, you'll see the country with the most people with diabetes in the entire world now is China. It's estimated almost 40% of every adult in eastern China is either pre-diabetic or diabetic. I want to stress this important point that I don't believe, and maybe the Milken Institute, this is me, I don't want to be speaking for the Institute, but very quickly, if we don't create opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa, where 19 of the 20 countries with the highest birth rate are, it might not make a difference what you did in the rest of the world. And I just want to stress that if we're going to have 1.5 billion more people, if there's not opportunities there, they're going to be someone else. They might be in Latin America, North America, Europe, Asia. And lastly, I think the point I really want to make here is that people think of India and China as similar. And so they're in Asia, they're in South Asia.
But it's a very good point.
They are so different. If you look at slide 3, you will see that there are more than 200 million more children in India than China. You'll see for every child born in China, there's almost 2.5 children born in India. There are more children in India born than all of South America, all of North America, all of the United States, all of Japan, all of Korea, etc. So where 80% of the world economy was, India today has more children. So yes, they're aging, more people over 65, but their issue with China is totally different between the two, even though they're located in the last. And lastly, as the president pointed out, if we look at slide 9, healthy planet, healthy humans. The changing of the food chain, 50% of all the increases in global warming are related to food. And the ability to move to a plant-based diet, The ability to grow food in laboratories will change the world. So I just want to make sure these three panelists are at the forefront, whether it's Latin America, whether it's leadership, whether it's sub-Saharan Africa, or whether it's India, of what this world is going to be shaped like in the next decade.
Thank you, Michael. That was fascinating. Can you just pick up on that? You know, India and China are very different places. Because it does sound ridiculous to even have this conversation, but I have this conversation on a regular basis with people. It's just...
Becky, India is a very, very diverse country. There's no country as diverse as India. We speak about 1,600 different languages. We're all united. We got 29 states, many of which are bigger than any country in Europe. Our biggest state has got 230 million people. We have elections where 900 million people vote, fully electronic, and we announce results within 4 hours. We have 50 political parties, 450 TV channels which abuse Prime Minister Modi every day, 2,000 newspapers, and we all live together. We just had an election where 180 million people voted. They changed governments. Now, economically, the South is far more developed with a lower birth rate than the North, primarily because of the fact they have an educational advantage. We got 42 million young people in college.
So how does India reshore much of what is going on in China at
You see, China is homogeneous largely, run centrally. They can dictate policy, get things done. The way they've grown in 30 years, no country has ever grown in human history. But they have severe challenges because of the growth. Now, India's growth has been very different. We grew 8.2% a year from $275 billion of GDP in 1991 to $3.45 trillion in 2023. 8.2% for 32 years in dollar terms. So we are very diverse. We're growing differently in different regions. There's no single authority in India who controls India. We are a very free society. And as we grow along, our economic model is going to be very different. Now, we have governments which use 40-50% of budget for the people at the bottom of the pyramid. Now, we have a solution. We have a society where out of 1.42 billion people, 1 billion people live on less than $1,000 a year. 400 million people live on $6,000 a year. Out of 400 million, 100 million have $10,000 a year. The balance 3 have $5,000 a year. And this $10,000 is growing at 8%. So our challenge is to make sure the bottom of the pyramid is lifted up. And power has gone to the bottom of the pyramid. 40% of India's population, they rule India. We don't have a thin elitist group ruling India. Well, they were ruling India long ago. Now they don't rule India. The people at the bottom rule India because their leaders are coming up and they are changing India in very, very different ways. So our model is very different, driven by diversity, driven by the fact that everybody is growing differentially. The gaps between some of the states in the East and the West and the South are dramatically going up. Multiple voices. And I would just say, China is different, India is different, India will grow differently, but India is not going to be a China.
That's fascinating. Patrice, will you forgive me if I wrap this up? I can give you a sort of 30-second final closing comment, if you will.
30 seconds.
Yes, go on.
30 seconds. What I like about coming to the Milken and being with Mike is it gives me a break from my shareholders who say, what's happening? Dividends, share price, why is my dividends not growing? I mean, I get to think about populations, what's happening in India, because that's the future.
Yeah,
and
stuff.
Health and the 5 issues that he identified, technology, entrepreneurship, education. So it's great to be here. It's a learning and an inspiring summit.
Yeah, go on.
Becky, I want to say this about investment. The Indian Stock Exchange has delivered 12% return in dollars over the last 30 years. The only other comparable market is America. America and India either been the top of the returns for the last 30 years. I mean, you should know this.
I do.
You see, people have a very negative image of India. Oh, far away, poor, nobody understands.
And I wanted to give you the opportunity to really sort of provide some grist for that, because I think when you live and work in this part of the world, the emerging powers is a kind of is a rather passé sort of story. I just think it's important that we take the opportunity to disseminate to the wider listening and watching public. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
indeed. This has
Thank
been
you.
absolutely fascinating. I agree. It's always a pleasure, Michael. You bring to the table some real food for thought, and that provides for what will be 2 days of terrific discussion. So thank you all very much for joining us early doors, and good luck with the next couple of days.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you so much. Thank you.